Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the collapse of France's fifth government in 3 years, fueling the rise of the far-right National Rally Party, while Germany's nativist AfD party grows in strength and the UK's ruling Labour Party blows its mandate, losing voters as fast as the anti-immigrant Reform Party gains them. Joining us is David Broder, an historian of the Italian far right. He is a regular contributor to the New Statesman and Internazionale, as well as the Europe editor of Jacobin. His books include The Rebirth of Italian Communism, Dissident Communists in Rome, 1943-1944, First Thing They Took Rome, How the Populist Right Conquered Italy, and most recently, Mussolini's Grandchildren, Fascism in Contemporary Italy. We will discuss his op-ed at the New York Times, They Were Supposed to Save Europe. Instead, They're Condemning It to Horrors. Then we'll speak with the filmmaker whose powerful documentary puts the audience inside the battlefield under Russian fire as Ukrainian soldiers fight and die defending their land Putin claims as his own. Joining us is Mstyslav Chernov, a Ukrainian photojournalist, filmmaker, war correspondent, and novelist, known for his coverage of the Revolution of Dignity, War in Donbass, the downing of Flight MH17, Syrian Civil War, Battle of Mosul in Iraq, and the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, including the siege of Mariupol. His video materials of which became the basis of the film 20 Days in Mariupol. An Associated Press journalist, the president of the Ukrainian Association of Professional Photographers, and a member of Ukrainian PEN, he has been wounded several times while working in war zones and has both won and been a finalist for numerous awards, including having shared the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2023. His new documentary, just out, is 2,000 Meters to Andravika, which just premiered on PBS Frontline and is now available to stream online. Then finally, with Trump pardoning crooked congressmen, scammers, embezzlers, fraudsters, and fanatics in record numbers, we'll speak with Michel, the director of the Combating Kleptocracy program at the Human Rights Foundation, as well as a writer, analyst, and investigative journalist working on topics ranging from kleptocracy, illicit finance, dark money, foreign lobbying, and foreign interference to the legacies of Russian and Soviet colonialism. He is the author of American Kleptocracy, How the U.S. Created the World's Greatest Money Laundering Scheme in History, and Foreign Agents, How American Lobbyists and Lawmakers Threaten Democracy Around the World. And his forthcoming book is The United States of Oligarchy, How America's Wealthiest Ally with Dictators, Weaken the U.S., and Destroy Democracy. And before we begin, for over a decade, we have warned that Trump is both a criminal and likely a traitor, not to mention he's mentally unstable, egomaniacal, woefully ignorant, wildly incompetent, insatiably greedy, and corrupt. Now it should be clear to all that his chaotic misrule must be ended as soon as possible, and until that happens, Background Briefing will continue to investigate and expose MAGA criminality and cruelty. But more importantly, explore strategies and popular movements to bring about regime change as quickly as possible to restore democracy and civility and stop the systematic destruction of the United States at home and its standing abroad. To help sustain us with public broadcasting and freedom of the press itself under assault as Trump's billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media, you can make a tax-deductible donation to our nonprofit foundation, the Public Truth Media Foundation, at publictruthmedia.org or at backgroundbriefing.org/donate. And thank you. And joining us now is David Broder, an historian of the Italian far right. He's a regular contributor to the New Statesman and Internazionale, as well as the Europe editor of Jacobin. His books include The Rebirth of Italian Communism, Dissident Communists in Rome, 1943-1944, First They Took Rome, How the Populist Right Conquered Italy, and most recently, Mussolini's Grandchildren, Fascism in Contemporary Italy. And he has an op-ed at the New York Times, They Were Supposed to Save Europe. Instead, They're Condemning It to Horrors. Welcome to Background Briefing, David Broder.
Hey, Ian, thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining us, David. And who is the they that are condemning Europe to horrors?
Well, the article focuses on three leaders in Europe, of the three biggest countries in Europe, who are meant to be level-headed centrists, saving us from populism. So one is Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, one is Emmanuel Macron, the French President, and one is Friedrich Merz, who's the Chancellor in Germany, heading a Christian Democratic, Social Democrat coalition. And really, the story is each of these leaders promised that they were going to stabilize the mainstream, fight off the far right, and show voters an image of competence. And in each case, all of them are failing, doing very badly in the polls. And in all those three, very important European economies, far right parties are gaining ground very fast.
And today, of course, we learn that France's fifth government has collapsed. That's the fifth government in 3 years. And Macron, of course, is also quoted as having spoken to other European leaders, expressing concern that the Trump administration is about to sell out Ukraine to Putin. But he's clearly losing it as the far right gains and Germany's nativist AfD party grows in strength. And as the UK's ruling Labour Party blows its mandate, losing voters as fast as the anti-immigrant Reform Party gains them. So where's the good news here? There is some from your article, at least.
Well, I think the situation isn't hopeless. As you say, the AfD is growing fast, the National Rally in France and in Britain, Reform UK. So, these are big and rising forces. And, this is maybe a different story from what we might have heard a few years ago, perhaps during the pandemic, where there was, a lot of kind of, I think, elite opinion makers were saying, well, we've had this wave of populism, we've had Trump, we've had the Brexit referendum, but now actually things are calming down a bit. And probably at the moment, it seems, in fact, that the story of the rising far right, that's gathering steam again. But I think there are limits to the far right's potential, and there are countervailing forces. So after all, even if we say that the National Rally is very strong in France or the AfD is strong in Germany, they have maybe a quarter or a third of voters behind them. Right? They claim to speak for ordinary people. They may even say they represent working class people, but they don't really have most people behind them. But they're becoming a increasingly strong force. So they're a real threat, and mainstream parties and center left parties, have to find a way to defeat them. They have to mobilize voters to stop them. So, that's not just about winning voters back from those parties. It's also about giving mainstream voters who perhaps vote for traditional parties or are thinking about not voting anymore. It's about giving them reason to vote. It's about giving them something to vote for, which isn't just like fear of the far right, but voting for a more prosperous future, voting for security in terms of their jobs, the services they rely on, and so on. So what I'm saying in the article is that there are some examples in Europe where the far right had seemed to be very strong, but has been much reduced, or at least kept from power. So I cite a couple of examples which are very different between themselves. Spain and Denmark, where two very different types of social democratic government have had some success in rallying their own supporters, rebuilding strength, in both cases based on some sort of strengthening of the promise of a sort of social democratic idea of social justice. So I think that those examples, even though they're not entirely successful, they're going through many problems themselves. I think that this shows we shouldn't just throw up our hands in the air and think the far right's ride is inevitable. We have to think about ways in which we can build new voter coalitions, give people something to vote for.
And another example, of course, is in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders suffering a loss of support as a centre-left party gaining in the Netherlands. But in terms of what's driving the right, and in terms of the war in Ukraine, it's pretty clear, at least to me, that the Trump administration, as Macron has warned in private to his European counterparts, that Trump is doing everything he can, along with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, to sell Ukraine out to Putin and possibly line their pockets in the process. There's still a real problem in Europe, isn't there, with Ukraine, all the refugees, the extent to which these governments now, Germany and others, and the Brits and the French, etc., are having to increase their defense spending at the expense of social programs, even introduced conscription. Those elements are not popular. And I imagine that Putin is taking advantage of that since he has no interest in making a peace deal, and he has the sort of the long game here. And I'm sure he thinks that in the end that the right-wing governments will take over in these key NATO countries, and basically NATO will cave. Is that a part of the mix?
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems to me that, as you rightly say, and as I discussed in the article, I mean, European countries already, without the the far right in power, Europe as a whole in general is switching towards a reindustrialization policy based on rearmament. Right. So there's talk of 800 billion of investment in rearming by 2030. The European Union has a big loans fund called SAFE in order to build the European weapons industry. So there's this big shift, in fact, even from like the agenda of green reindustrialization to military industrialization being the kind of collective European project. That isn't going to be enough to save Ukraine if Trump withdraws support, right? It's happening too slowly. It's too long term. It's not bound up with real and immediate military aid to Ukraine. And also there's various reasons in terms of intelligence sharing and so on for why Ukraine won't be able to hold up, or Europe won't be able to sustain Ukraine's defense without American support. So I think that the scenario I'm really worried about is one in which Ukraine is sold out, that Russia is able to carve up Ukrainian territory, right? That Ukraine is permanently hobbled, and also we still get this massive program of remilitarization in Europe, conscription, perhaps also including things that we're starting to see already, like pressure on the position of Ukrainian refugees in Europe. So if you think of a country, whose politics might be imagined to be, strongly for Ukraine against Russia. So take the example of Poland. In Poland, the main far right party, Law and Justice, which has been in government before, it has the current president, but not the prime minister. But that party is pushing for cutting the welfare benefits to Ukrainians who are in Poland. And of course, Poland's the country in Europe with the most Ukrainian refugees. So I think there's a very dark sort of post-war Europe we can imagine after a Ukrainian defeat, which is militarized, which is one where the kind of political center and figures like Macron and Merz and so on have lost all authority, including because they're not real players in foreign policy, but one where we're sort of dealing with the effects of a disastrous outcome to the war. And I think that the Trump administration has obviously been a big enabler of these far right parties in Europe as well. If anything, the Trump administration is probably more radical than some of these parties I'm talking about in Europe. But they're seeing Europe isn't able to act as a superpower, or even to act as a decisive factor in Ukraine. And they're looking to establish more direct relations between their countries and the Trump administration, rather than a kind of European collective foreign policy.
And of course, J.D. Vance gave the AfD in Germany a huge boost. And he and Trump, of course, and Miller are executing an extremely hostile anti-immigrant platform here with their own private armies, the ICE disappearing people by the thousands off the streets of American cities. So if you look at Germany going back to the Syrian civil war and the exodus of millions into Europe, and that has not been particularly popular, and that I think has given rise to these far right parties with an anti-immigrant sentiment. As an anecdotal notion, David, I've watched a lot of French and Scandinavian television series because I think the writing and acting is so much better than these ridiculous sort of phony American shows that we have over here. And the bad guys in all of these TV shows are immigrants.
Hmm.
And you mentioned in your article how the Danish government has dealt with this anti-immigrant hostility and problem. So, I mean, when you've got Farage and company in the UK rising in numbers because of their anti-immigrant stance, is there a humane and sensible way to deal with this? And is the model Denmark?
Yeah, I mean, well, so in Britain, the Labour Party in government under Keir Starmer has recently kind of landed on this idea of Denmark is the example to follow. Also because it's like a social democratic government, but which is very harshly cut down on immigration, in particular, basically through the idea that refugees aren't like people to who've arrived and who should be integrated, but like they're kind of temporarily allowed to stay, but will then be pushed away again. There's also certain elements of kind of performative cruelty copied by the Labour government in Britain, such as the proposal to confiscate migrants' valuables, including personal jewelry, upon arrival. So there's this idea which is kind of like the Labour Party has lost touch with the working class. The working class don't like immigration. Ergo, the thing to do is to slash immigration, and therefore working class people will come back. I think other than a very stereotyped vision of working class attitudes and what the working class actually is, the limit of this idea is that it's imagining that you can stop the rise of far right parties by kind of giving in to what they want, and that the idea is that that's not just going to encourage more of the demand for the same, in fact, demand for more extreme measures. And actually, in Britain currently, there's certainly a rising social conversation, certainly on social media and among parts of the far right represented by people like Tommy Robinson. In Britain, we recently had the biggest far right march I think, in the last 100 years. And it was people to the right of Nigel Farage, right? And they're talking about remigration. They're talking about saying, well, Muslims are incompatible with coexistence in Western society. And they're increasingly resorting to a ethno-nationalist language. So I don't think this problem isn't something you can kind of just like settle with or cut off or make go away. I think there needs to be an honest conversation about the role of immigration in British society, in particular in regard to labour shortages. I mean, partly also because while these right wing and far right parties are continuing to rise, that's happening even as the actual number of migrants is falling quite quickly and has done for the last couple of years. And that's creating labor shortages, particularly in things like the social care sector, right? The workers who are relied on to look after elderly people in particular, that's a big problem. So, of course, it's true that far right parties, their rallying cry is "we'll stop immigration," and then centre left parties can decide on whether to try and compromise with those ideas or not. But I mean, ultimately, what they need to do is to create a model of integration of migrants and a labour market that includes a certain reliance on immigration, that's able to chart a path to prosperity for enough people that sort of ethno-nationalist headbangers aren't going to get an audience. I think for a party like Labour, it doesn't necessarily have to focus on winning back voters directly from Farage or win back people who are obsessed with slashing immigration. What they also need to be doing is giving their own traditional base reasons to vote for them, right? And this Labour government has done very badly in terms, and I talk about in the article, this is a Labour government with the biggest majority in Parliament in history. And its record in terms of job creation, in terms of investment in reindustrialization, things like that, has been pathetic. So, Labour's vote or polling share is only half what it was at the general election last July. That's not because half of Labour's voters have decided that immigration is too high. It's because they're finding Keir Starmer's government profoundly disappointing. It fails to take the political initiative. It fails to politicize questions of economic justice, of tax, of jobs, and is basically paving the way for a right-wing takeover because we never hear anything except the need to slash immigration. So while it can be, of course, be recognized that immigration does create pressure on certain elements of public services or housing and so on, the solution to that isn't to engage in some sort of fantasy of returning to the past of a all-white Britain. It's to talk seriously and honestly about the means of integration. I think that that's also something that Labour's failing to do. Keir Starmer has apologised for mass immigration, saying that it's caused incalculable damage to British society, and this kind of thing. And I think that's for mainstream parties to indulge in that kind of rhetoric. I mean, that might be thought to appeal to right-wing voters, but frankly, I think it comes across as a pale imitation of the real thing. And if people want to vote for Nigel Farage's party, or if they want to vote for Marine Le Pen or the AfD because they want to slash immigration, then I don't really think that it's realistic for centre-left parties to pretend that they're going to do that.
Well, curiously enough, David, here in the United States, Trump's and Miller's and Vance's performative cruelty is actually backfiring. I think there's a moral outrage where a majority of Americans are appalled at rounding up immigrants and breaking up families, etc. But just in the last minute, though, I wanted to touch on what you suggested earlier, which is we may end up with the worst of all worlds, where Ukraine is hung out to dry, even though the Europeans are upping their defense spending, but it's way down in the pipeline before it actually does any good for the Ukrainians. And Putin, of course, has a long game, and I'm sure he's doing everything he can to encourage these right-wing parties in Europe to help break up NATO. So is that the right picture that you're giving us here? A pretty dismal one.
Yeah, I mean, I think often in British media, we kind of imagine that after Brexit, other countries might want to like copy our example and like leave the EU or that kind of thing. And I think that's not how it will happen in terms of kind of splintering. And I don't think that, for example, a Front National government in France would like take France out of the EU or NATO or anything like that. I think what they will do through their actions is to make it fundamentally weaker. But I think, as I say, I think in a way we certainly do risk this kind of worst of both worlds because if there's this imperial peace that's being discussed in Ukraine, that US gets a payoff in order to sign away part of Ukraine's territory, then that's not going to create a peaceful solution or order because it's not a peace even remotely or even rhetorically based on justice. The population of Ukraine is already down very many millions since 2022 and even more since 2014. There are millions of Ukrainians living around Europe, and I think it's going to, if that kind of settlement if the war is halted, let's say, on the basis of this kind of carve up, I think it's going to be a festering sore under European politics. It's going to be a conflict which isn't resolved. I think it's a kind of a very troubling scenario, certainly because I think as I say in the article as well, if we're having this kind of remilitarization, we're having conscription and so on, then that's going to take place also, even if the AfD or the Front National and these kind of parties get to government. So I think what we're looking towards and fearing is it's not like the European Union is going to collapse or disappear, but we're going to have a Europe that's integrating much more right-wing forces and who will have their own version of this kind of authoritarian agenda based on massively expanding armed forces and so on.
Well, David Broder, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Well, thanks for having me on.
And again, I've been speaking with David Broder, who's a historian of the Italian far right. He's a regular contributor to the New Statesman and the Internazionale, as well as the Europe editor of Jacobin. His books include The Rebirth of Italian Communism, Dissident Communists in Rome, 1943 to 1944, First They Took Rome, How the Populist Right Conquered Italy, and most recently, Mussolini's Grandchildren, Fascism in Contemporary Italy. And he has an op-ed at the New York Times. They were supposed to save Europe. Instead, they're condemning it to horrors. And he joined us from Berlin. We're going to take a brief station break and back speaking with a filmmaker whose powerful documentary puts the audience inside the battlefield under Russian fire as Ukrainian soldiers fight and die, defending their land Putin claims as his own.
The world knows there's no choice. people in our neighborhood, they would if they only could. Meet and shake the other's hand, work together for the good of the land. Give us all an equal chance. It could be such a sweet romance. And the soldiers who are dead and gone, if only we could bring back one, he'd say we gotta have peace. We gotta have peace. Let the world know it. Peace, peace, peace. We gotta have peace. People hear us. Through our voice, the world knows there's no choice. Save the children. Save the children.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Mstyslav Chernov, who's an Ukrainian photojournalist, filmmaker, war correspondent, and novelist, known for his coverage of the Revolution of Dignity, the war in Donbass, the downing of Flight MH17, the Syrian Civil War, the Battle of Mosul in Iraq, and the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, including the siege of Mariupol, where his video materials became the basis of his film 20 Days in Mariupol. An Associated Press journalist, the president of the Ukrainian Association of Professional Photographers, and a member of Ukrainian PEN, he has been wounded several times while working in war zones and has both won and been a finalist for numerous awards, including having shared a Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2023. And his new documentary just out is 2,000 Meters to Andreyka, which just premiered on PBS's Frontline and is now available to stream online. Welcome to Background Briefing, Mstyslav Chernov.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And I saw your film last night, Mstyslav, and I must say it's devastating and powerful and an extraordinary piece of journalism. And it puts the audience inside the battlefield under Russian fire as Ukrainian soldiers fight and die defending their land Putin claims as his own. But here in the United States, we have a very strange situation where the majority of the American people support Ukraine, understand they are the victims and they're heroically trying to defend their country, and that the Russian dictator is a monster and he's invaded a sovereign nation and he's destroying the country and killing its people. And just last Thursday, he said he will fight until the last Ukrainian dies. But our government seems to be more on Putin's side than on the Ukrainian people's side. And as a Ukrainian, having almost been killed making this film, you can see it from how close you were to the people being shot all around you and blown up. How do you feel about this? Am I correct in suggesting that there is this horrible disconnect between the American people and our government? Is that how you see it in Ukraine?
I'm afraid that disconnect lies in something else, and it's more dangerous than we think. It's not only a disconnect in understanding what is justice and how it has to be exercised around the world, but it's also understanding of the security situation. I have to say that it's what he said. It wasn't only that he's ready to fight until all Ukrainians die, and that's probably what Russia wants. Russia, from the very beginning of this war, has stated multiple times that they want Ukraine to cease to exist. And that's the final goal. And if we see the negotiations happening, that they are actually not negotiations about peace. Mostly for Russia, they are these negotiations is the way to continue the war for as long as they want. But also we see nuclear threats. Like just a couple of days ago, I've seen the interview that Vladimir Putin was giving about that he's prepared to destroy. Basically, he's prepared to destroy Europe with nuclear weapons. And that is direct threat to NATO, and it is, of course, direct threat to United States. And we We in Ukraine understand clearly because we see the narratives that is existing, that exists inside Russia, and inside Russia, the only narrative is that United States and European Union are the enemies of Russia, and the primary goal of Russia is to destroy both Europe and the United States. You should, listen how cheering they are for possibilities of a civil war in the United States, how they love to say that some of the United States negotiators are working for Russia. They really like to say that. They laugh at the American people. They threaten constantly both American people and Europeans with nuclear weapons. So the true disconnect that I see is not in whether supporting Ukraine or not supporting Ukraine, whether it's just or not, but it's what kind of a security threat Russia presents right now for the United States. And the answer is huge security threat. And my fear is that there is very little understanding of that. Even people who support Ukraine, who I talk to, they say that, well, Ukrainians are doing the right thing. They're, small country defending their land from the home invasion, basically, the concept which is very, very understandable for American people, the defending your home from home invasion. But I think the motivation behind the support of Ukraine, especially for the United States, should lie in understanding that Russia is existential security threat, and they are doing everything to destroy United States and European Union. And although they say otherwise publicly, that's what they want, and that's how they build their strategy.
Right. Well, if you know anything about Putin, and I've certainly studied him, if you go back to his KGB days, he was totally indoctrinated by the concept of Glavny Protivnik, the main enemy. And that is
Yeah, yeah,
how
yeah.
he sees us as the main
And
enemy.
divide and conquer, right?
And
So
it's never changed. But we have traitors in our midst. We have at the highest level, the president. Just the other day, our local congressman referred to Witkoff as a traitor. The deals that Jared Kushner and Witkoff are trying to make with Putin, as far as they're concerned, Ukraine costs them money, whereas Russia will give them money, or Putin will line their pockets. This is what I find so disgusting. And
well,
in the voiceover in your film towards the end, after this horrendous battle, you say that you're afraid this war is going to go on for a long time and that people will lose interest. And that simply cannot happen.
well, that what I have seen throughout the last decade that I spent in different war zones, that is inevitable, unfortunately, and public interests to every conflict that is happening far away fades. But again, I'm not in a position to judge the policies that the United States government is making, or how Americans are dealing with it. What I know from the position of Ukrainians who been deceived by Russia many times is that there is very, very little trust in everything that Russians are saying, and it feels very bitter when you see that Russians managed to convince a lot of Americans and part of the American government that they mean well. I think they're tricking and lying to U.S. diplomats. I think they are presenting their part in peace talks as attempt to achieve peace. However, it is just a way to win time. And also, they pretend that they're interested in business because that's what they know is working. And the overall concept of making it good and profitable for Russia to stop war is probably a good idea in some way, but it's never gonna work. And we know why. In 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine, it annexed Crimea, it took over part of Donbass, and then the European Union reacted on that. Or didn't react, more fair to say. The European Union increased business deals with Russia, increased the dependency on Russian oil, on imports from Russia, specifically for that reason, hoping that Russians care about money, hoping that improving business relationships with Russia will help to stop Russia from continuing the invasion. That didn't work. They don't care about money. They don't care about business. All they want is Ukraine to be destroyed, United States to be destroyed, and European Union become just fall apart. That's their goal. And everything they do is for that. And whatever they say otherwise, it's a lie. And
Right.
because we know he comes from KGB background, isn't he? The entire policy of the Soviet Union at that time was directed into destroying their enemies by splitting them apart. And that's what we see in the United States. That's what we see in Europe.
Right. Well, let's talk about your film though, because it was recently on PBS's Frontline, and it's co-produced by PBS's Frontline and the Associated Press, which are two really great journalistic outfits. And in fact, arguably, Frontline has some of the journalistic material you'll see here in the United States, and the Associated Press, of course, sets the standard. So what's happening is that you are able to convince a Ukrainian colonel in charge of this operation, where they want to free this small town of Undervika, which is at the end of this 2,000-meter strip of
Yeah,
land,
one
which is
mile.
a
Yeah, 1 mile.
yeah,
Yeah.
little bit of forest, but it's only what 200 meters wide probably, and on both sides it's this wasteland, looks like a moonscape. It's all mined, and they let you go, and of course halfway through it, you get to a point where one of the soldiers that meets you says, "Where are your guns?" You know.
Yeah.
So you and somebody else, right? There were two of you, right? They had cameras,
Yes.
and that was it.
Yes.
And
Mm.
you just are there from the very beginning of this film throughout, and you are in the firefight, and it's ruthless and relentless. But at the end of the day, the film ends with this moonscape of destruction, both of Andravika and all these other towns, and it makes you realize the amount of firepower that's been leveled at your country. It's just unbelievable, and the price that should be paid by the Russians to rebuild is astronomical. It is so incredibly visual, and the use of drones is amazing. So, and also you show really how the modern battlefield is. And of course, the Pentagon is kind of waking up to realizing that Ukraine is actually the guinea pig, if you will, of future warfare.
Yeah, the modern warfare is very, very different from how I think the doctrines of NATO were built, and we can see it's constantly changing on the front line of Ukraine. And that's what I want to say. Actually, I'll come back to that strip of forest, but I think another stake that United States and European Union should know is that if Russia wins, if Russia succeeds and destroys Ukraine, it will take over military technologies that are unmatching in the world. And Ukraine right now is, in that sense, in the military sense, the most advanced and the most experienced army in Europe and maybe in the entire world that adapted to true modern warfare. No one else in the world except Russians understand this warfare. And if Ukraine is defeated, then Russians will be the only ones who have that knowledge, and they will be very dangerous. Coming back to that little forest, yes, it is. The entire film is happening inside that strip of forest that is squeezed between two minefields, and it leads us for the entire film. We're walking towards that little village where the flag needs to be raised, and the entire film we are going to that goal. And the film is built on two different mediums. One visual medium is videos from the helmet cameras of soldiers that are participating in combat, and we see an experience of this combat firsthand, the way we were never able to see it in human history, to just be able to feel what the real war is quite important right now for every member of the audience, because the world is sliding towards war. And the other part of the film is, of course, me and Alex Babenko, my friend and co-producer and second camera, walking through that moon landscape, because it feels like another planet. It's just the entire ground is scarred and mutilated by bombs and trenches. So we walk through that space towards the final goal of raising the flag. And it's pretty scary to not have a gun, of course, because you can't protect yourself. But then it is a rule for journalists, for filmmakers. We have cameras, and that's it. And we are primary targets, of course, because both sides of this war know that the picture of a flag over the village is even more important than a flag over the village itself.
Well, the other thing about it, though, is just in closing, Mstyslav, is the human interaction, the closeness, the bonds that these Ukrainian soldiers form, and they form them with you as well, where you meet people in a very deep and real way as they talk about their lives, and it's particularly moving. For example, the middle-aged man with a wife and kids who had a pretty safe job as a military policeman, but volunteered to fight. And he's talking about how his wife doesn't want him to be a hero. And then you find out that 2 months later he died. And you see a lot of death and funerals, and it's just heartbreaking. So I thank you for the work that you've done and brought to our attention. And I do hope that everybody in this country gets to see this film and realize which side we should be on.
Yeah, and I also think that, thank you for your kind words. And I think, as Fedya, our protagonist, says, war is a time to start everything over. But also, I think war is a way to understand what is really important and what makes us human. The war is so horrible and unacceptable and disgusting that it strips away everything. And what it truly leaves us with is the humanity and the fight for that humanity in the worst possible violent places. We still try to save that humanity, and that ability to connect with each other, that ability to preserve humanity, is something that we as humans really need right now.
Well, Mstyslav Chernov, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And again, I've been speaking with Mstyslav Chernov, who is a Ukrainian photojournalist, filmmaker, war correspondent, and novelist, known for his coverage of the Revolution of Dignity, the war in Donbass, the downing of Flight MH17, the Syrian Civil War, the battle for Mosul in Iraq, and the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, including the siege of Mariupol, where his video materials became the basis of his film 20 Days in Mariupol. An Associated Press journalist, the president of the Ukrainian Association of Professional Photographers, and a member of Ukrainian PEN. He's been wounded several times while working in war zones and has both won and been a finalist for numerous awards, including having shared the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2023. And his new documentary just out is 2,000 Meters to Androvika, which just premiered on PBS's Frontline and is now available to stream online. We can take a brief station break, back looking into how Trump is pardoning crooked congressmen, scammers, embezzlers, fraudsters, and fanatics in record numbers.
Soldier boy for his soldier's pay obeys the sergeant at all, whatever he says. The sergeant will for his sergeant's pay obey the captain till his dying day. The captain will for his captain's pay obey the general order of battle play. The generals bow to the government, obey the charge. You must not relent. What of the neighbors and the prophets in bars? What are they saying in the public bazaar?
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Casey Michel, the director of the Combating Kleptocracy program at the Human Rights Foundation, as well as a writer, analyst, and investigative journalist working on topics ranging from kleptocracy, illicit finance, dark money, foreign lobbying, and foreign interference to the legacies of Russian and Soviet colonialism. He's the author of American Kleptocracy, How the U.S. Created the World's Greatest Money Laundering Scheme in History, and Foreign Agents, How American Lobbyists and Lawmakers Threaten Democracy Around the World. And his forthcoming book is United States of Oligarchy, How America's Wealthiest Ally with Dictators, Weaken the U.S., and Destroy Democracy. Welcome to Background Briefing, Casey Michel.
Ian, thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And there's been an amazing flurry of pardons coming from Trump in these last 9 months plus. Some figures, between 1,650 and 1,800 in total. A lot of them, of course, were the insurrectionists on January the 6th. But nevertheless, it is shocking how some of these, the worst people, are being pardoned, like the former president of Honduras, who exported 500 tons of cocaine into the United States and said, we're going to shove this up the Yankees' noses. And for whatever reasons, Trump just pardoned him. So I guess if you have a relative in jail who is a crook, all you have to do is write a letter to Donald Trump and enclose a check.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ian. We actually saw more details on that pardon of the foreign Honduran president come out just today. And again, as you laid out, this was a gentleman who was effectively the head of a narco state in Honduras and was convicted for 45 years in prison, effectively a life sentence for his role in aiding and abetting the cartels and, of course, shipping that much more cocaine, especially, but drugs more broadly into the United States. And what we learned in the reporting just today is that it wasn't just him or his wife or his children sending letters to the president. It was people in the inner circle of Donald Trump's orbit, the kind of greater MAGA orbit, people like Roger Stone, people like Matt Gaetz, the former disgraced congressman who was Trump's first nominee for attorney general just a few months ago, lobbying directly on behalf of this jailed narco trafficking former head of Honduras, former president. It was those figures that ended up succeeding in convincing Trump that this former Honduran president was actually a good guy. We should ally with him to help beat back supposed communism in Honduras, so on and so forth. Again, it was the hiring, the working with these Americans that are in Trump's orbit that led to this success. And of course, this was the exact topic of my most recent book, Foreign Agents, which you mentioned a few moments ago, how these foreign despotic tyrants or narco traffickers hire Americans to do their bidding.
And of course, the more egregious one that just came out as well the day after the Honduran pardon is Congressman Cuellar and his wife. He accepted 600,000 in bribes from Azerbaijan oil company and from a Mexican bank. He's the top Democrat on the House Appropriations Subcommittee. And he also supported legislation blocking payday lending, which is truly, I mean, the regulations to rein in payday lending, which is the worst bottom-feeding scam that goes on with poor people who can't get bank accounts to get ripped off with interest rates that would embarrass the mafia. And then, of course, you've got him also working to weaken money laundering laws and get a Mexican bank off the hook for its money laundering. So this, nevertheless, has led to the minority leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, basically saying that the case against Cuellar was thin and that he deserved to be pardoned. So
Yeah.
go figure. What's going on?
So, Ian, look, I think a few points of context are worth bearing in mind. The United States of America is almost 250 years old. And it wasn't until last May, that the United States of America, the Department of Justice, formally charged a member of Congress, a sitting member of Congress, with acting as a foreign agent on behalf of a foreign power. It took nearly 250 years of American existence to get to this point where a member of Congress is formally alleged to be a foreign agent. And that happened last year when the Department of Justice charged Henry Cuellar, this longstanding member of the House of Representatives out of the great state of Texas, with secretly working on behalf of the dictatorship in Azerbaijan. Again, Cuellar not representing his constituents in Texas, but representing a dictatorship, an oil-rich kleptocracy in Azerbaijan, doing their bidding, blocking sanctions, helping Azerbaijan's wars against Armenia. The list goes on, and that's even in addition to all the things that you just laid out a moment ago. It was a watershed case. It was unprecedented, and again, it shows just how far these regimes have gone to try to sink their teeth into American politics. And it was going to set the precedent that cases like this would be prosecuted until yesterday, when Donald Trump, kind of out of nowhere, came out and said, I am pardoning Henry Cuellar. He is a victim of a politicized, a weaponized Department of Justice. He is free to continue serving in Congress. What was especially strange about this, Ian, is that Cuellar, he's a Democrat. He's not even a Republican. He's a Democrat who previously voted to impeach Trump. But apparently that doesn't matter. For Donald Trump, all that matters is that it doesn't matter how corrupt you are. If you come to him with the right language, the right people, and you say you were a victim of the Biden administration, then you can get off scot-free.
Well, there may be a motive, of course, trying to get Cuellar to switch parties and become a Republican. That may be at play here, and that's probably why Minority Leader Jeffries made that statement in support of Cuellar.
Yeah. But look, just to pause on that for a moment, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's disgusting what the a minority leader is saying about this. This was an airtight case against a gentleman who was serving a foreign power, and now all of a sudden you're bidding with the Republicans on him for his allegiance. I think it is just an absolutely disgusting state of affair that Jeffrey should be ashamed of himself for having said that.
So what about my suggestion that you can line Trump's pockets and get off, no matter what kind of a scumbag you are, like the hedge fund guy that just got off recently after defrauding 10,000 American investors, like the guy that rigged bids on stadiums that he was building that, I don't know, he has some connection to the Trumps, etc. So, and the Honduran, I mean, if this guy for decades was sending 500 tons of cocaine into the United States, he was taking a cut. So there's no way that this former president of Honduras was short of bribe money. Yeah. So there's I think a valid suspicion there. And you just mentioned that the news just came out today that Matt Gaetz and other these right-wing nutballs around Trump, they were lobbying. So maybe they were getting money from him as well as Trump. Is there a money trail here?
Ian, absolutely. I mean, look, there's always been a relationship between money and power, money and politics in American history, but we have never seen as anything as front and center, as overwhelming and as obvious as we see with Donald Trump and his donors and his financiers, both domestic and foreign. Because I think, again, it's worth remembering this is the first time we've ever had a president who's also has his personal company, his personal piggy bank, opening up new investments in foreign governments or with foreign governments in Saudi Arabia, in Serbia, in Vietnam. Both him, his family members, his in-laws, his inner circle, they are making money hand over fist. And because Trump now controls the Department of Justice, they do not need to worry about any prosecution whatsoever. And of course, as you just laid out a moment ago, if those who've already been prosecuted or have already been jailed are a way to get financing to the president or his inner circle, then yes, they are effectively guaranteed a pardon or some form of leniency. The lists goes on and on and on. You just named a few of them. Of course, there are the crypto fraudsters that have already been prosecuted that were purchasing Trump's digital assets, his crypto funds, lining the president's pockets, opening up new crypto investments. I mean, frankly, the entire crypto industry seems to have gone all in on Donald Trump, and there are all these new avenues of directly paying the sitting president. Think of things like World Liberty Financial, which is Trump's own personal crypto vehicle that anyone around the world with the click of a button can pay directly the sitting American president. And as long as they show proof of purchase, can go to the White House and say, I would like X, Y, or Z. And oh, by the way, if you give me that, I could give you even more money in the future. I mean, it is just the clearest form of corruption we have ever seen in our lifetimes, and frankly, more than we've ever seen in American history.
Well, also Ross Ulbricht, the founder of the Silk Road dark web marketplace, they do so much damage. That guy has got so much blood on his hands because that was a conduit for all kinds of crime and drug trafficking, money laundering, and assassination for hire. I mean,
Yeah.
how the hell did that happen?
I mean, look, Ian, this is the great irony of it all, right? Whether it's the Honduran president who was this head of a narco state who Trump is now pardoning and completely undercuts any claims to be targeting narco traffickers, whether it was the head of Silk Road, whether it was CZ, the former head of Binance, which was, again, another crypto platform that was linked to funding for things like Hamas and Al Qaeda. You kind of can't make this stuff up. It is as much of a whiplash from what Trump claims in public to what he's actually doing with so many of these pardons, right? It's drug runners, narco traffickers. Those are aiding and abetting anti-American terrorists from around the world, all of whom are now getting off scot-free.
So does he think we're stupid, or are there enough stupid people that still support him?
I think what he thinks is that he can get away with whatever he wants to get away with. Again, the famous quote from Donald Trump being, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. I think he thinks the exact same thing. He could take bribes from wherever he wants. He could pardon whoever he wants. He can monetize a presidency as much as he wants, and he won't lose any of his supporters from that base of support. And frankly, he's been proven right time and again. I don't know where the bottom is. I don't know if a bottom exists, but certainly President Trump is trying to find it.
So, Casey, here we are talking about this rampant, in-your-face corruption from the most corrupt president in the history of the United States, who, along with his family, are just monetizing the White House and our foreign policy in a shameless, greedy, grifting spree. It's just nauseating. And here we are trying to keep a public radio station, a community resource, a valuable resource here in Los Angeles and in Southern California alive as the mainstream media is being bought out by Trump's billionaire buddies. Do you have any thoughts about the need for our audience to support public radio, particularly in terms of your book, Foreign Agents?
Well, look, Ian, I'm deeply grateful that you are giving me the opportunity to talk about some of this. I'm deeply grateful that you're providing the book as well for listeners. You know, again, the book tells the story of frankly, how we got here, how we got to this place in the first place. And it goes beyond Trump, it goes beyond his family, but of course it is Donald Trump and his inner circle that bring so many of these things front and center. We saw these trends, we saw these developments, we saw these policies leading up to Trump's inauguration or re-inauguration in January of 2025, and he has taken all of this and he has exploded it even beyond, frankly, where I thought things were going to go. But I think, Ian, to your point, your program, your radio station, the community you've been able to build, to be able to amplify and highlight stories like this, trends like this, investigations like this, certainly books like mine. This is something that is needed now more than ever. It is needed now more than ever for many reasons, right? Not only because of what's happening in the general morass of mainstream media, but because, as you just outlined, things are only going to continue getting worse as the American oligarchy and these American oligarchs that are close to President Trump continue snapping up, buying out, threatening, bullying, suing into oblivion the remaining pillars of American independent media. Again, this is a story we have seen take place elsewhere in the Russias and the Turkeys and the Hungaries of the world, where these previous independent media outfits are suddenly dismantled because those with the deepest pockets and those with the levers of power in the presidency or as prime minister are able to use the powers of state to target anyone trying to investigate any of this, which is, again, something we're seeing take place right now in the United States of America, which makes your voice and your platform and your radio station that much more important moving forward for not only your community, but frankly, this country writ large.
So I guess in a way, Casey, in trying to support public radio and for incredibly modest amounts of money we're talking about, compared to the billions and the trillions that these crooks are embezzling and getting pardoned by Trump, and the crypto scam, which is eventually going to crash, if not eventually, probably soon, and then the poor taxpayer is going to be hung out to dry picking up the tab. So you can see the damage that's being done, but I find the contrast so extraordinary. And I guess it gets down to the way that the battle lines are set up now between the oligarchs and the rest of us. The rest of us have the numbers and small amounts of money, and they have tons of money. But at the end of the day, it's the numbers and the small amounts of money that have to prevail.
Yeah. Look, if you're exactly right, Ian, I echo everything you said, and it has to prevail not only for the sake of, again, this radio station or this program itself, but frankly for American democracy writ large, because when so much is consolidated in the hands of so few, whether we're talking about wealth or power or all too often the both of them, that is the death knell for democracy. That has been the story of the past few decades. Again, the dismantling of democracy after democracy by the wealthiest powers or the wealthiest individuals that exist in country after country. And it is a story we're seeing take place in the United States of America right now. And all I can hope, all I can ask for is that we try to learn the lessons from those that watch this take place in country after country around the world. Again, I just listed Russia or Turkey or Hungary, but of course you could extend that to places like Azerbaijan, which we now have a member of Congress apparently openly serving. But the list goes on and on. And it is this fight of democracy versus oligarchy that's going to be the defining feature of at least the next decade, if not longer.
Well, Casey, Michel, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks so much, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Casey Michel, who's the director of the Combating Kleptocracy program at the Human Rights Foundation, as well as a writer, analyst, and investigative journalist working on topics ranging from kleptocracy, illicit finance, dark money, foreign lobbying, and foreign interference to the legacies of Russian and Soviet colonialism. He's the author of American Kleptocracy, How the U.S. Created the World's Greatest Money Laundering Scheme in History, and Foreign Agents, How American Lobbyists and Lawmakers Threaten Democracy Around the World. And his forthcoming book is United States of Oligarchy, How America's Wealthiest Ally with Dictators, Weaken the U.S., and Destroy Democracy. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org. where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
By 9:30.